This is Lucky Mommy, single mom of 3 teenagers, and welcome to my chaos. One of my great joys of parenting has been the opportunity to see the world again for the first time. When the Lucky kids were small, my mom and I loved finding opportunities to take them out on adventures. For example, museums, theater, and things like that. My mom is absolutely brilliant at finding free things. And quick pro tip, if you sign up for the mailing list for museums and theaters and places like that, you'll hear about kid-friendly events and free experiences. So even if a kid doesn't enjoy it, it didn't cost a fortune for them to be bored. Grammy researched every museum in our area, and she figured out when we could take the kids for free. So if the museum was kid friendly, like the Children's Museum, they could go, they could see things, they could play, experiment, and it was really hands on. But if the museum was perceived as not being kid friendly, I remember that my friends would challenge me on it. Like, why would you take your kid to the Museum of Fine Arts? They're just going to be bored. They won't be able to touch anything. They won't be able to play. You're going to have a bunch of restless kids on your hands, and you're just going to be frustrated. So I took this insight and I thought about how can I be creative and come up with ways for them to really enjoy the experience and make it hands-on. And no, that doesn't mean that I had them, touching the paintings at the MFA. The first time we went to the MFA, I gave them each a little tote bag with a notepad, pencils, pens, colored pencils in it, a couple of snacks, and a couple of small toys for them to play with. So we would go to the different exhibits and I would have them to sit with their notepad and their colored pencils and to draw their own versions of the things that they loved. I remember going to a coin exhibit and I thought it was really fascinating because it walked you through the elements of a coin and how coins were created. So specifically, there are certain elements that have to be on the head side of a coin, and then there are certain elements that have to be on the tail side of a coin. So after they went through the exhibit and we talked about the various different coins that we saw from around the world, and they picked the ones that they like, and then they each identified a favorite. I had them to spend some time studying the favorite and really sort of understanding how it was set up. And then we left the exhibit, we found a couch off to the side to sit down on, and I had them each to create their own coin. And we reviewed what goes on the head side, what goes on the tail side. They got to sit and relax and draw. I got to sit and relax and just chill. And they got to be creative and they got to really kind of think about, if I had my own country, what would represent my country and how would I illustrate that on a coin? And that was really fun. It was a really fun exercise for them and they really enjoyed it. And they were interactive. They were able to learn something that was new and interesting that they wouldn't necessarily learn at school. And they weren't disruptive or in any way sort of bothering the people around them. A couple of years later, we went to the Chihuly exhibit at the MFA. Now, I thought this was such a cool concept, right? All of these sculptures created in glass and color. But I have to admit, I was a little bit terrified, right? The idea of taking 3 small children into a space filled with glass, right? It could be catastrophic. But again, they brought their notepads, they brought their colored pencils, and they were able to walk around this exhibit with just glorious color. It was really, really beautiful. And we had such a great time. And then they drew their own sort of glass sculptures, right? They created what they would want to create if they were the artist. So it was an incredible experience. And I'm really grateful that we were able to have it. At this stage in their lives, this isn't something that I would have just done on my own, right? I got to experience this because I wanted them to experience it. And I was able to take them and have a great time. And I got to see this not only through my own experience, but also through their eyes and how much they loved it and how much creativity it sparked in them. Jump forward. As they got older, we started to experience the theater together. Now, as a young actress, I made an effort to support all of my friends in the shows that they were doing. So I saw a lot of theater in my late teens and in my 20s. So, of course, I was gonna have to share my love of the theater with the lucky kids. So, again, my friends were concerned. How can you take the kids to the theater and expect them to sit still for 2 or 3 hours? They're going to get bored. They're going to fidget. They're going to disturb the people who are in the seats in front of them because they're going to kick on it, those kinds of things. So, having spent my life in the theater, I was able to really think about how do I cultivate an experience for them so that it's not disruptive for the people around them. So, first, I always prepared them for the shows by telling them about the stories before we went. I would walk through the story. If there was a movie version, sometimes we would sit and we would watch that. We would discuss the concepts and the characters, what they like best, what character they would like to be like, who made them laugh, who was mean, and different things like that. So they would develop an understanding of the story and the characters and the concepts before they were sitting in the theater. So this meant they wouldn't be lost. And I think a lot of times kids get bored at the theater because they have no idea what's happening on stage. But if they've already gone through the story and they understand what to expect, then the show is really just enriching their experience and bringing it to life and not giving them a whole lot of stimulation that they have to kind of figure out what's going on. So I remember taking them to see Aida. And before going to the show, we talked through the story. I played the soundtrack on repeat for the whole week leading up to the show so that they knew the songs and we were able to talk about the story. And the cool thing about Aida for me is this concept of finding your true love repeatedly over and over again through time. And so we talked about this idea, right? So when we saw the stage version, they were able to identify the two characters finding each other at multiple points through history. And then we had a really cool conversation about the idea of true love, like true eternal love. And we talked about your soul finding its counterpart in another and being so connected and inspired and drawn to each other that you just continue to come to each other no matter where you are in space or time. So that was cool. It was a very sort of, high concept, right? And they were pretty small at the time, but it was an amazing conversation to kind of hear it again from their youthful perspective. So I would always set up the theater as a big, fancy adventure. We always got dressed up really nicely. Kid 3 would wear like ball gowns. The boys would wear button-down shirts and ties. And these were some of the rare times in their childhood where I would actually put on a dress. Going to the theater was an opportunity for us to be fancy. And when you're fancy, you behave like a fancy person. So we would go out for a nice fancy dinner, and they like sitting at a table with a cloth napkin and tucking it into their neck and having civilized conversations. And sometimes they would speak in British accents all night long because British accents are fancy. So we would go to the theater and we would do a photo shoot. We would take pictures in the front lobby. So they used to watch the Oscars and the Emmys with me, and they knew that fancy people arrive at the theater, they do a photo shoot, and then they go inside and they sit down to watch the show. I would always pick seats that had no one in front of us. So my ideal space in the theater is in the balcony because I like to look down and be able to see the whole show. I don't like sitting in the front row of the balcony because we're sort of right on that ledge and that gives me anxiety and I don't want them to be that close to the edge. So I would pick seats in the front row behind the aisle, that first aisle in the balcony. And if they kick or if they stretch, there's nobody in front of us to be bothered by that. Now, practically speaking, I always limited their water intake at dinner. And I always made sure that they went to the bathroom right before the show. I'd have them walk up and down the aisles in the balcony area before the show started so they wouldn't be restless. And so we sit and we'd watch the show. And then at intermission, I would let them walk around the theater. They could go all the way up to the top of the balcony. They could go down to the main floor, wherever they wanted to go to explore the theater. And then they knew that when the lights started to flash, it was time for them to come back and join me in our seats. And because most shows, most theaters, our seats were in the same place, it was very easy for them to always find their way back to me, and I never needed to worry about them being lost. So finally, we always took books with us. For years, Kid 1 always had a Harry Potter book with him. Kid 2 always had a couple of comic books. And Kid 3 usually had a sketch pad and crayons or a coloring book. And there was always enough to keep them occupied and to keep them entertained if they didn't want to engage in the activity at hand. So sometimes they're just not interested, right? And I didn't force them to participate if they just wanted to sit and read their book. I spent a lot of my childhood sitting in corners, reading books, and not engaging with people. And that was my happy space, right? Like my fairy tale book was my go-to, and it was my happy space, and it was where I wanted to be rather than interacting with people around me. And I really worked hard to cultivate that ability in the Lucky Kids. If you're not interested in what's going on, you can disappear into your story and you don't have to disturb the people around you, and you don't have to be a disruptive force. So I have to say there's a lot to love about sharing museums and the theater with the Lucky Kids. But the thing that I remember most was watching them experience things. I would take them to shows that I had already seen. And when I knew something exciting was getting ready to happen on stage, I would just turn to them and I would watch them, and I would watch their faces as they lit up when something exciting happened, or as they like clenched when something really intense was happening. And as they were filled with joy when, someone found their love interest, or they finally kissed, or, whatever the thing was that we were waiting for. And it was really cool for me to see their experience of the experiences on stage. I remember going to see Wicked. And at the end of the first act, when Elphaba is flying on stage and singing notes that are just in the rafters, the look of awe on their faces as they were able to just imagine themselves, I guess, being able to do such a thing and just be transported by it. And it was really cool to watch them and to see them experience those things. And it brought me so much joy. So your action item for this week is to think about the experiences in the world that you enjoyed before children, or the experiences that you would like to enjoy, and figure out where your opportunities are to share that love and that passion with your children. Now, whether it's museums and theater, or sporting events, or travel, or whatever the things are that you enjoy, how can you be thoughtful about giving them an active way to engage and be excited about the experience? And how can you give them just enough tools for managing their distraction so that if they don't engage, it doesn't take away from other people's experience? Creating an adventure is part of what makes them engage and stay focused. So for us, it was, we're having a fancy night. And when you're having a fancy night, you have to act like a fancy person. And that worked for us. And something different might work for you, but really think about what is that thing that captures your children's imagination. I would love to hear about your outings with your kids and the techniques that you use to make sure that the experience is not just enjoyable for them, but also enjoyable for the people around you. Comment with your questions, your feedback, and new topics. Like, subscribe, share, and follow me on Insta at Lucky Mommy. And thank you for joining me in this quest to raise a thriving future generation. I'll see you soon.